talk about Node and NPM. So I would like to show the way you install a new repo in your system. The very first time you started dealing with React and JavaScript, it was a bit special, to be honest, because you created conflicts and even the team app using a command line tool, which name is create React app, right? So you created a repo. But generally speaking, in the real world, obviously you'll create repos and all these things, but you will also download existing repos that someone has created, so you want to work with, right? The team apps are a good example. So what I would like to show you now is how to download a repo and how to set it up. It's something that I'm sure you've been doing already, but let's just formalize the steps we need to follow. First of all, let's find a repo. I'm going to randomly select one of the team apps. So 8 days a week, just because it's the first one. So once you are on the repo details, the first thing is to download it. The correct way to download the repo is to clone it. Right? You can see a green button on the right-hand side, clone or download, right? Do you know the difference between cloning and downloading? Download means you download the zip file, right, with all the folders and images and everything, right? That's the rudimentary, that's a very old version, right? You download the zip file, you burn it in a CD, and then you share it with your colleagues, right? 90s. I mean, that's still valuable in some particular cases, but in the majority of the scenarios, that's not the way you work with repos. The way to work with repos is by clone it. Clone it means still, it will get downloaded eventually, but it will be integrated with Git. So it will be much easier to get new updates, to push new changes, you know, to work with it, right? Also, you may have noticed that there are two ways to clone a repo. You can clone a repo using HTTPS, or you can clone it using Git. Interestingly, I'm not getting the Git option in here, probably because I'm anonymous. So let me try to sign in and see if that helps to get the Git option. Can't promise it. Here you go. You see, after signing in, I can clone it using HTTPS, or I can use SSH. You know what's the difference between HTTPS and SSH? That's correct. Rafa is right. So with HTTPS, security is not incorporated, right? Obviously, when we work with GitHub issues, we need to authenticate ourselves, right? Because you'll be committing, you'll be pushing, so we need to have some kind of accountability of who's doing the changes, right? So with HTTPS, security is not incorporated out of the box. That means that every time you push, you have to type your credentials. Please, you enter your username. Enter your password. Okay? Still okay, but in the long, that's okay if you want to, you know, to collaborate with a project maybe 1 or 2 times. That's fine. But if that's something you're going to work on a daily basis, you're going to keep pushing all the time. Let's use SSH, right? SSH. With SSH, we can handle security in a different way. We can create an SSH key. We can upload the SSH key to either the repo or to our profile. That means that every time we push the SSH key, the public key will be incorporated somehow into the push. And because of that, you know, there will be like a protocol, handshaking protocol to determine whether you are a valid user or not. In other words, we don't need to type user and password all the time, right? If you want to catch up about how to create an SSH key and all these things, please refer to the second video on the private platform, right? The second video talks about how to deploy an app to GitHub. Right, so I'm going to use SSH as a matter of good practices. So simply copy that URL. You can click on the copy button, I believe, as well. And then let's go to a terminal. All right, so on the terminal, I'll show you in a second, you can essentially, you can paste it, right, somewhere. So, okay, so now I'm in the wrong folder. You see, be careful with these things. This is a classic problem. And I've seen that several times already. So as soon as I clone the repo, it will create a new folder on my system. Be careful, don't do that inside of another repo, because then that will be a bit of mind-blowing. You'll have problems, right? You remember sometimes you got, oh, why I got 5,000 files pending to be committed? It's because of this kind of thing. So be careful. Be careful. Where do you drop it? I'm going to drop it in my home directory, because I have, you know, it's like my root, my home folder, right? So I'll leave it there. So the way to clone a repo is by typing git clone, and then, oh, I didn't copy it. So let me copy it. See, git clone, and then eventually the name of the repo that you want to clone. Yeah? So once we do that, the cloning process will start. Yeah? That should be fairly quick, because we are just cloning the source code. We are not cloning all the dependencies. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Yes, essentially we are cloning what you've manually written, what you've manually created. So once the repo is cloned, let's try to open in Visual Studio. So let's open a new folder. And let's go to, yeah, this is my home directory. Yeah, here you go, right? So you can open the project. And essentially, I'll get all the files and folders you've been working on as part of the 8 days a week project, right? You can see all the components and everything, right? All these things. Cool. So now, imagine that I want to start a server. I want to see how your app looks like locally, right? So the way to do that is, if I check package.json, and say, okay, these guys, they had a command called start, right? So that means I can type npm start, and then that will hopefully start the server, right? Let me open the integrated terminal, because then that, oh no, sorry, let's keep the other one, right? Because it's Zoom already, so it will be hopefully easier to read. So, first of all, because we've cloned the repo, we need to do cd to the repo name, right? Because by cloning the repo, that creates a new folder. So after doing the cd, I got all the files and everything in here. So now, the first thing I may try to attempt is to start the server. What happens if I type npm start? Will it work? Why not? Correct. Let's see what happens when I try to run npm start. It throws an error, few errors, immediately, command not found. Before explaining why we got command not found, maybe you've noticed that even though npm start at least tries to work, and it will work eventually, if you create a new command, like, because you got some commands, right? Start frontend, start backend, you got all these things part of the Codeflix app, right? So if I imagine that I have a command called start backend, will that work, assuming all the dependencies and everything are set up? Sorry, you cannot see anything, right? So let me add some break lines. imagine that we have that task, and the task actually works. So the task is correctly set up. Is that the correct way to run tasks in NPM? No, why not? Correct, correct. Generally speaking, when we run an NPM task, we need to type npm run. I think now you can also do run script, right? Run, even simpler. Start is an exception. You can, of course, you can do npm run start. Look, if I do npm run start, it will throw the same error, right? But start is a special task in npm. That's why you type npm start. npm understands that this is a special task, so it gives you the option to skip the run command, right? But generally speaking, remember, the way to run tasks is always with npm run, right? So npm run start, npm run build, npm run test, npm run eject, npm run pre-deploy, npm run deploy. Yeah? Simple. So now, back to the problem. Here we got an error. And the error says, command not found. If we look a few lines below, it's giving us, even though it may not be as obvious as some of the React errors, it's telling us what the command not found is. React scripts start. So in other words, npm doesn't understand what React scripts is. It has no idea. What was that? The problem here is we forgot to install the dependencies. Every time you do git clone, the next task you should do before running any command is npm install. npm install will do two things. We'll install everything in the dependencies block. We'll see how to add the stuff there in a minute. And we'll also install everything on the dev dependencies. We'll see the differences between dependencies and dev dependencies. But essentially, everything in there will be installed locally. So, if now I type npm install, it will go through the list of dependencies of my project, and it will download them all. As a side effect, you will see a new huge folder in your file system in the root directory of your repo called node_modules. Node, look, here you go, it's there, right? Node modules is grayed out, right? Visual Studio is telling you, be careful with that folder, right? So why be careful? Because that's a black box. You should never ever touch that folder, right? You shouldn't. We'll see why, but you shouldn't. And if we expand the folder, as the thing is still work in progress, right? Generally speaking, depending on the size of the project, it may take from 30 seconds to few minutes. So, lots of things are being installed now. In theory, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 dependencies, right? So, on my romantic world, I may expect to have 12 folders in all modules, one folder for each dependency, right? But it's taking a while, right? Lots of things here, like, oh, what's going on? Why it takes that much? Look, even though it's still work in progress, you can clearly see how many weird things we got here. Hundreds, thousands of dependencies. What's going on? Why, if I'm theoretically trying to install 12 dependencies, why I end up getting hundreds or thousands? That's because the way npm works. when you install a dependency, for instance, React, yeah, because that's the one you know really well. When you install React, under the hood, React has lots of dependencies. And every dependency has dependencies. We have a huge tree of dependencies, right? So NPM will search for all the dependencies in our dependencies tree until they are completely installed. I'll show you an example. Again, don't touch the Node modules folder. Don't do that at home. But now if I scroll down and I search for the React one, whatever it is, sorted alphabetically, thankfully. So you see we got React. If I open React, React has a package.json, right? So you can see that React has some dependencies as well, right? And these dependencies will have further dependencies. Yeah? So there is a huge list of dependencies that needs to be satisfied. As a side effect, the original repo, 8 days a week, that was maybe, how big? 300K? Less than a meg for sure. Eventually, a modern Node project, maybe 300 to 400 megs as a starting point. All right? That's pretty impressive. If you like video games, you may remember things like Super Mario 64. That game was one of the masterpieces in the video game, in the digital industry, right? Was 64 megs. 64 megs. Now, to get nothing, to get a hello world, you need 400 megs. Modern software development, right? It's one of the consequences. There's something important here. By default, we are not pushing Node modules, of course not. So that's why we need to install it. Because if we were pushing Node modules, our repo in GitHub, instead of 400K, will be 400 megs, right? That's why we always need to do npm install. It's about practice to have, I mean, if I go to GitHub and I have a Node modules folder here, wrong. Do you know how to tell Git, please don't push the Node modules folder? Because Git, how Git knows that that folder is like private, local? Do you know how to configure Git to ignore it? Correct. There is, by default with create React tab, but if you are not using create React tab, you may have to create that file manually. There is a Git Ignore file in the root folder of your repo. Git Ignore means please drop here what kind of files and folders you want to keep private. You don't want to push to GitHub. Actually, the first one is Node modules, because that's the most dangerous one. If we remove that file, suddenly we'll be pushing thousands or even hundreds of thousands of files, which is horrible. Yeah, don't do that. Node modules, don't touch it. Just leave it there. From time to time, you may have issues with Node modules. So it's a healthy exercise from time to time to delete the folder and install everything again from time to time. Any question? No? So let's do the same, this is an exercise. So imagine that we are working on the 8 days a week app and we want to install a new dependency. We want to install a new dependency, right? So for example, let's think about chart.js, right, which is one of my favorite libraries in JavaScript. So if I go to chart.js, which is a very nice, brilliant, fancy, mobile-friendly, free, open-source charting library that we are using as part of the Codely platform. So look, installation, right? Fortunately, in 2019, the majority of the dependencies got installed in the same way. Easy, clean, and efficient way, right? in the old times, every library needed special instructions about how to set it up, right? That was horrible. But now, it's very simple, right? So look, the way to install any dependency is by typing the classic way, npm install, name of the library, and then /save. Look, there are 3 ways we can install a library. The first way is typing npm install and name of the library. The second way to install it is doing the same thing and adding /save save, or the shortcut -s. The third way to install a library is using /save dev, or with the shortcut $D. So what are the differences? With the shortest version, npm install and name of the library will get installed, so we can use it straight away, but nothing will be added to the dependencies or dev dependencies, nothing. That means that if we got a new colleague in the team and he or she clones the repo and installs everything, it won't work. Because if we are using the library, he won't get the library installed because it's not part of either dependencies or the dependencies. That's why if we want to persist the library for future references, for future installations, we can do /save. /save will add the dependency to the dependencies block. That means that, let's try that. If we run it, you will see that in a minute, I will have a new line on my dependencies block with chart.js. If it decides to start working, right? That's all also, oh, here you go. It's taking a while. But anyway, it will work, right, eventually. If we run the same command using /save dev, the dependency will be added to the dev dependencies section. So, do you know what's the difference between dependencies and dev dependencies? That's correct. That's correct. Look what happened. So sometimes you get warnings and things like that. That's normal on the NPM world. I think I've never seen an installation with green text like everything went fine. There are always problems, right? And why there are always problems? Because we have a dependency that has a dependency that has a dependency. So eventually one of the dependencies may be throwing a warning or whatever, right? But this there's nothing we can do, unfortunately. As far as you get that line with the plus on the left-hand side, that means the library has been added, then it's all sorted, hopefully. So now back to the project. You can see line number 8, you see the green color on the left, right? Oh, new line. Chart.js has been installed. So if I run npm install tomorrow in a new laptop, it will get installed alongside, which is a good thing, right? And as Poppy mentioned, the main difference between dependencies and dependencies is dependencies talk about things that we need in production. We need on Heroku. We need on GitHub pages. The user needs them. Do we need React? Yes. Do we need charts? Yes. Do we need whatever, right? Execution time dependencies. And dev dependencies are these things that we don't use in execution time. We use, mainly speaking, at build time. For example, GitHub pages. That's a great example, actually. That's a great example. Why? Because Heroku doesn't care about GitHub pages. There is something local that we, from our laptop, trigger from time to time. There is no point to drop GitHub pages into the dependencies. Technically speaking, it's correct. We can leave it there. It will work, right? but it's unnecessary. Why this is important? First of all, we should make sure that all the dependencies that we need in runtime are here. If by mistake we drop React as part of their dependencies, you know what will happen? Heroku will complain, because Heroku will try to build everything. When you type git push Heroku master, it will try to build everything, and then we say, okay, this is a React application. What's React? I don't know what React is. What React is. So Heroku will ignore the dependencies, right? That's why we need to make sure that whenever we deploy to Heroku, all our runtime dependencies, all our execution time dependencies are listed here. On the other way around, if we are overprotective and we drop everything on dependencies, it will be okay, but there will be two side effects. The first one is Heroku will take longer to deploy your app, right? Because it's installing things that it doesn't need, right? So let's keep that block precise. The second side effect, which may not be obvious on the first day, is at some point, know that providers like Heroku will limit you the amount of memory you can use and things like that, right? So if you try to install too many things, Heroku may complain. May complain in terms of storage, because your app may grow a lot, unnecessary, right? It may complain in terms of CPU usage. It may complain in terms of memory usage. It's hardware, right? That's why it's important to keep the dependencies block efficient.
If we install extra ones, which we decide we don't need, do we just delete it from the line?
Correct. So, if now we realize, because we've been playing with chart.js and we realize that this is not what we were expecting, so we're going to get rid of it, right? So you can remove the line. So you manually remove this line. You know, next one installing the app won't install it, right? Next time we deploy to Heroku, it won't get installed. Every time you deploy to Heroku, it's running npm install in this block, right? So that's fine. However, if you do that, locally, if you already install it, it will be still there, right? Which is not a big problem, but, you know, how can we remove physically the library from your system? Correct. You remember we type npm install chart.js.save. Now we can type npm uninstall and everything the same, right? So if we type that, it will revert the process. It will essentially do two things. First of all, it will remove that line on package.json, and effectively, it will remove all the files and folders in our system. So, if you install something and you don't want it afterwards, don't be lazy. Don't just remove the line from package.json. Run npm uninstall. It takes a while. Yes, it takes a while. Could be faster. Yes, it could be faster. But it's a good practice, right? Because your project will grow. I mean, thing is, if I show you what we got on the Codiri platform, so here we got lots of dependencies, right? And dev dependencies, and we got lots of things, right? So if I show you, we're talking about a project with maybe few thousands of lines of code, which is not massive, but you know, it's growing quite a lot, right? So we got lots of scripts, we got lots of dependent. Look at how many dependencies we got, right? Look at how many dependencies. Keep going, keep going, keep going, right? Yeah. Lots of things, front and back end, right? So that's why, for me, it's very important to make sure that whenever I introduce a new dependency, it goes in the right place, right? And that's still a small project. Imagine if you're working on a commercial project with probably even hundreds of thousands or even millions of lines of code, right? So, yeah, so we have uninstalled our chart.js dependency. That means that if we go back to the 8 days a week repo, you see it's gone. Line number 8 is not talking about chart.js anymore, right? Which is a good thing. Right, so that was pretty much it. Yes, also FYI, because NPM has grown a lot, there are some problems, handle dependencies, locking versions. You may have noticed that when we install a version, some of the versions have a hat, some of the versions have a fixed version without the hat. So there are some important things, right, that here we should know. That goes a bit beyond the scope of the session. Just FYI, imagine that you install chart.js and there is a bug on the last version and you cannot use it. You can also install a previous version. So the way to install a previous version, imagine that the last version of chart.js is 2.1. I don't know, I'm just making it up. We can use add and then install 1.9.0, for example, right? So you can go back to previous version if you need it. Generally speaking, that's a bad practice, because if there is a bug on the latest version of chart.js, it's their responsibility to fix it, right? And then everyone will be happy. But just in case that, obviously there are some tricks and there are some, advanced usage of NPM. Apart from that, also FYI, if NPM, not problems, but sometimes it's a bit hard to keep all your dependencies in sync and stuff like that. That's why there is now an alternative to NPM, which is becoming way more popular, which is Yarn. You heard about Yarn. Just speaking, if you're using a modern library, so you can install it using either NPM or Yarn, right? So Yarn has better control on dependency versions and all these things, in theory, right? Also, is supposed to be more performant. So you can install things quicker. You can uninstall things quicker as well. In theory. No, well, in theory. I mean, I say in theory because I don't use Yarn, right? So I cannot tell you. But if you do a quick research in Google, you will see, I mean, if I do Yarn versus NPM performance, I'm pretty sure there are lots of articles, benchmarks, right, that will tell you which one is more performant. For example, look, right? That's very interesting. PNPM, I never heard about that. But look, npm install, right? It takes 23 seconds with npm, 20 with Yarn. It's not a big difference. But if you install something and you want to reinstall it, it takes 8 seconds with npm, less than 1 second with Yarn, right? So it looks like Yarn is, generally speaking, more performant in terms of cache handling and dependencies management and all these things, right? PNPM, again, I never heard of that, but that looks promising according to the figures, right? Looks, right? Cool, something that, it deserves some kind of research. Cool, anything else, guys?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, because my Heroku is complaining now after uploading. Does it mean that it has something with dependencies?
That's completely unrelated. So if Heroku is complaining, the first thing you should do is run the command it's telling you. Heroku logs as stale. That will open the stack trace with the errors, and then you'll see why it's not working. It could be actually because one of the dependencies is missing. That's a classic problem, especially the first time you deploy to Heroku. But it could be something else. I don't know. So we need to inspect the logs. Yeah. Anything else? No? Anything else on the other side of the line? Bala, Mo? Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you, Bala. Cool, that was it for today. See you later, guys. Cheers.